Hey everyone, so let's keep moving with this third part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, second half of this third part. So we're into On Old and New Tablets. And basically this is just in this whole section, Zarathustra or Nietzsche goes through and summarizes a lot of the key ideas that he's already expressed. So I've just made a couple of notes on some of the sections which I found interesting or I thought were worthy or deserving of special focus or attention. So the first one I picked out was section 5, and here he says that noble souls don't want something for nothing, and this applies also to life. So my quote is, "One shall not wish to enjoy where one does not give joy." The mob, on the other hand, the rabble, they want to live for nothing. They want to get something for nothing, and this tells us a little bit about this idea, this concept of nobility for Nietzsche and what he's getting at here. And it it doesn't just mean a kind of cruel, brutal, anything goes for the stronger over the weaker. Rather, there is this aspect, this dimension of nobility. It's just that it's noble, not out of any what Nietzsche would call misguided notions about equality or fairness. They give because they have something to give. These noble souls, they have something to give. They have plenty, so they're able to freely give. But they're not giving in order to right a wrong that's happened. They're not giving because they feel guilty about their successes or because they take pity on other people. It's a kind of independent, strong giving rather than a giving that comes from one of these weaker feelings that Nietzsche rails against. So the next section was section 8. And here Nietzsche tells a little, he gives a little story, a metaphor with of a river with bridges and railings spanning it. So when people look at this river, they say everything is in flux. Some people say this, everything is in flux, everything changes. But some other people look at the bridges and say everything is fixed and firm, everything's solid, stable. So that everything is in flux is almost certainly a reference to Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic. So just a note there. Then winter comes along and everything freezes, right? Even the river. So surely the world is firm now, right? Everything is fixed. Even the river, which we thought was, which some people said was in flux, was changing. Even that's now fixed. But the then a thawing wind comes in, sweeps in, and even the ice, which was frozen on the bridges. Obviously, the river melts, but even the ice that was frozen on the bridges cracks, and as it breaks, it cracks the bridges themselves, and they fall into the water. So now he says, look at it now, everything is actually in flux, and that was the way it was. And so this, I think, is a metaphor for our values of good and evil. The bridges represent those values, which we imagine are fixed and permanent and absolute, whereas in actual fact, it's the opposite. We each create our own values, and there's nothing permanent about them. They are 100% transient. They're creatable. Section 10 was the next section I looked at. And this concerns the injunctions, thou shalt not rob and thou shalt not kill. And Nietzsche says these were once thought to be holy, and we were forced to abide by them. But Zarathustra, or Nietzsche, says that actually life itself is full of robbing and killing. That's what is, we see that in life all around us all the time, not just in people, but in animals, plants, anything that's living is involved in this, is involved in actions that we would call bad, evil, wrong, robbing, for example, robbing and killing. But this is what life is for Nietzsche. This is what characterizes life. It is this at its very core. And so when we come along and impose our artificial, in some sense, artificial restraints on this process called life, when we impose values that say, this is wrong, if you do that, you're bad, then we are resisting and we're shrinking, in a way, life itself. And this is what Nietzsche's against. So again, he's not advocating stealing or murder, but he's just saying, I think he's saying two things. First, it's the imposition of, it's making of these things a negative. It's making a negative judgment towards these things. So when we say, instead of kind of embracing these dimensions, these darker, if you like, aspects of life, we say, no, you can't do them. They're wrong. They're evil. Then that's what Nietzsche's against here. And secondly, he's while he's not saying that the murder is okay or right, he's just saying that as long as you're coming from this position of from this noble position, from a mind frame of what he would call nobility, then it doesn't matter what you do. And even in some cases, then killing is justified or the right thing to do. And one of his one of the people he talks about in some of his other writings as someone he admires was Napoleon, right? Who obviously has a lot of blood on his hands, right? So he was involved in a lot of killing. And if we weigh or judge Napoleon by our standards, which are thou shalt not rob, thou shalt not kill, obviously he's evil to the nth degree, right? But that's not the case for Nietzsche, because Napoleon was coming from, he wasn't murdering out of, he wasn't slinking in the back alleyways and exacting revenge or killing someone because they're better than him and he wants to just get rid of them. He was standing up, Napoleon was standing up, asserting himself, affirming his values and his ideals, and anybody who got in his way and he who refused to or who challenged him, he would deal with them, and if that involved killing, then so be it. But he's just saying, that it's not to, we shouldn't we shouldn't say that killing is wrong. We shouldn't say that robbing is evil. These things are they're not. We ought not to impose our own kind of judgments on these natural dispositions. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, section 11 was the next one I had, and this is pretty much about the past. Zarathustra talks about two regrets he has regarding it. First is the way that people continually interpret and reinterpret it, so that it turns out to be nothing more than a bridge which kind of leads to them. There's probably, and he's talking about all philosophers here, and almost certainly specifically about Hegel, who thought that all of history pretty much was leading up to his era in Germany, and that it was all, everything was a build-up to that. But also the New Testament does pretty much the exact same thing to events in the Old Testament. All of those events in the Old Testament were reinterpreted as events leading to the birth of Jesus and death and crucifixion of him. So that was the first regret that people are just interpreting and reinterpreting it. They're not looking at it honestly and openly. And secondly, he says that the rabble simply ignore it. They don't even pay any attention to it. They think no further back than their grandfathers. So in both cases, all past is abandoned, which he regrets. Section 12, Zarathustra talks about a person's nobility arising from the future, not the past. So he's getting at here, the way that things were. You could buy nobility, or you could be noble by being born into a certain family, and these are all kind of getting nobility from events that happened already. Nietzsche's saying you can only be noble through where you're going, through your goals and aspirations. That's what makes you noble, not where you've been or how much money you have acquired or who your family were, that kind of thing. Sections 14 to 18. So these sections, they have a similar theme, and Nietzsche goes after those who hate the earth, which is a theme that's come up many times, right? So when he says the earth, we're talking about the physical, the corporeal, and he calls these people who hate the earth, he calls them world-weary. And he says, the quote is, "There is much filth in the world, but that does not make the world itself a filthy monster." Which is cool. So he's for the here and now, the physical, even though it's not perfect. The pious even renounce reason because it's connected to the earthly. And this is all through Christian history, right? They did exactly this. They railed against reason and knowledge and education, because it was tied to this earthly realm. They wanted to direct their attention upwards. So he's just referencing that. Believing that there's nothing of worth in the world leads to life-denying doctrines, like thou shalt not desire, or thou shalt not will even, which we've looked at. Schopenhauer was a prime suspect there. And he also says that even those who are world-weary, they are world-weary while still living in the world. So this is like the ultimate hypocrisy. They deny the world, but at the same time, they're still here. They're still living in the world. So something's not right there. And finally, the last thing I'll mention with this is he believes that even as these life deniers, even as these world-weary people denounce the world, they themselves lust after it in a fashion, because they're so obsessed with it. They're in love with their own earth weariness. It's that which defines them. What defines them is their resistance to this earthly realm. And so even as they denounce it, their identity is tied to it. So again, there's hypocrisy there. Section 20 is the next section I flagged, and this emphasizes a kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest, where life naturally and correctly disposes of the weakest. So the idea is like the slowest pack member ought to be left behind, otherwise it will bring danger down on the stronger members of the pack. And the quote is, "What is falling we should still push, and he whom you cannot teach to fly, teach to fall faster." So that's what I mean. There's that Darwinian element, and that's definitely it's quite strong in Nietzsche's philosophy, but he was anti-Darwinism. He was very much anti-evolution by natural selection, and I think the reason I think he was against Darwin is that and this is probably a misunderstanding of it by Nietzsche. The idea with natural selection is that only the fittest survive, right? So only the best members, the best individuals of a species will carry on, will propagate their genes into the next generation. And so built into natural selection is this idea of a kind of a guaranteed forward progress. And Nietzsche's resisting that. He doesn't like that. He thinks we have to work to create a better, stronger next generation, the ubermensch. To get them, it's not guaranteed. We don't just, we're not just able to just keep doing what we do, and eventually the ubermensch will arrive. He's saying that it's the exact opposite. We have to invest ourselves. We have to work hard in order to make sure that the best members, the best individuals, are able to arise in the future. And so that's why he's against Darwin and natural selection. But of course, Darwin and Nietzsche have different ideas about what is the best. So I don't think there is an actual clash between the two, but the way that they kind of framed the idea of the fittest. For Darwin, the fittest was just whichever individuals are best able to survive and reproduce. For Nietzsche, that description is not the fittest, is not the best. The best are those who are hardest, strongest, who best capture that idea of the will to power. Those are the noble individuals that he sees as the best. And there's no guarantee that they will carry the day, and that their offspring will in turn grow up to be even better than them. So that's a little spiel on Nietzsche and Darwin. Section 21 was the next part. He says we must be proud of our enemies and save ourselves for a worthier foe. So we can hate but not despise them. And there are three things I get from this. First, we ought to be picky in our battles, passing by those who aren't worth engaging. And I think I've talked about that before. Second, he distinguishes between hating and despising. So hating is in a sense a pure, if you like, reaction, response, where we recognize this challenge and we rise to meet it. Whereas despising is more like it's like a weak, negative reaction. It's saying that this other person, my opponent, is actually better than me, so I hate him, so I despise him. Hatred, on the other hand, is more honest in a sense. And finally, we can see his idea of Nietzsche's elitism coming forward here. The best should rule, the best also want to rule, and where the doctrine is different, there the best is lacking. The ubermensch. Section 23, more here on the difference between men and women. He says men should be fit for war, women should be fit to give birth. Okay, we've heard that before, but he also says both should be fit to dance with head and limbs. And so there interestingly, he's kind of bringing the two men and women together, putting them on a par. They both should have this joyful exuberance, which is the other half of Nietzsche's philosophy. They should both have that. And he even says we should consider every day lost on which we have not danced at least once. And we should call every truth false which was not accompanied by at least one laugh. So there's that nice counterpoint to all of the darker or the more or the less, what's the word? The less compassionate element in Nietzsche's thought. Section 24, he gives some advice for marriage. This is kind of funny. He says that, well, not funny, it's just interesting. He says that he seems to say that a couple should live together before they get married to ensure that their marriage will remain strong and they won't get a divorce. The quote is, "Give us a probation and a little marriage so that we may see whether we are fit for a big marriage." Again, it's interesting. There's no man is in control here. He's kind of throwing the two together, which is not something you would necessarily expect from Nietzsche. Section 25, he talks about the state again. He claims it is a trial and not a contract. And that's a direct reference, I think, to people like Hobbes and Locke, who fought for the idea that society is a contract. And he says it's a trial in the sense that people try to find a great individual who can assume command and whom they'd be happy to obey. So yeah, that's Nietzsche's thoughts on the state in a nutshell. Section 26, the good and just represent the greatest danger to us because they think they already know what is good and just, and they will attack and crucify those who attempt to create their own values. And he specifically calls the good and the just here the Pharisees. And this must surely be a reference to the Romans and their crucifixion of Jesus. And again, this brings back that idea that Jesus wasn't a bad guy for Nietzsche, or Jesus wasn't one of these, he wasn't a priest that he rails against so much, nor was he one of the herd. He was a creator of new values. Even though I think Nietzsche disagrees with those values, he recognizes that Jesus was in fact a creator, and so deserves some respect. Section 29, he talks about the creators becoming hard, the need for them to be hard, and he uses the metaphor of diamonds and coal. And so, yeah, they must be hard to create their own values. Cool. The convalescent, that's the next big section, the convalescent. And there's a little bit going on here. We're back to kind of the story of Zarathustra, what he's doing. So he's been tormented by this realization of the eternal recurrence, right? That everything just recycles. And he kind of passes out, and he's just in this melancholic state. And when he wakes up, he just lies there, doesn't eat or drink for 7 days. And after this time, the animals wake him up and tell him to get on with his life. And they try and point out that this doctrine of eternal recurrence, it's a cause for joy, actually, not despair. And the quote is, "All things themselves are dancing. They come and offer their hands and laugh and flee and come back. Everything dies, everything blossoms again. Everything parts, everything greets every other thing again. Eternally the ring of being remains faithful to itself." So they're pushing this idea that this doctrine of eternal recurrence is actually good, and life embraces this. Right? It's something to be cherished, not something for despair. So Zarathustra then throws something, a spanner in the works, when he says, quote, "Man needs what is most evil in him for what is best in him. That whatever is most evil is his best power and the hardest stone for the highest creator. And that man must become better and more evil." Okay, so that's not the spanner that I was talking about. That's just an interesting phrase. But again, in line, I think, with everything we've talked about. But first, if I can just run through it, when he says we need more evil, he doesn't mean, we need more genocide, rape, and torture. He means that we need to embrace our desires, our passions, our will to power, and not be ashamed of it. Sometimes this will involve, as I've said before, murder, killing. Sometimes it will involve stealing. Sometimes it will involve even what we would call rape, perhaps. But rape in the same way that the male lion takes the lioness. There's no stigma. There's no negative stigma attached to it. It's just the way that life plays out. That's what he's saying. Tough pill to swallow, but that's his position. Second thing about that little passage, we've also called our passions and this natural will to power, this will to greatness, right? We've called that evil, and it's these raw passions that make us strong, and denying them denies life itself and denies the strength that is inherent in them. So we need whatever's most evil in us, and because that's what's best in us, that's what's hardest and strongest, that's what will get us to greatness. The third thing is it's only against our enemies that we can demonstrate our strength. So we need, again, bigger and better enemies if we're to realize our greatest selves. Remember, he says the overmen need over dragons to slay, and that's this idea again. We must embrace this, and instead of kind of pushing it down and pretending or trying to crush it out of us, we should embrace it and revel in it. So anyway, now back to the spanner. What has upset Zarathustra so much? He says this thing has choked me and had crawled into my throat. And if you remember, this is a reference back to earlier in this third part, where he talks about that snake, his dream or his vision with the shepherd and the snake that was caught in his throat. So that's a reference back there. And what the problem is, this thing that has choked him and crawled into his throat, isn't the fact that humans are evil, but the fact that this evil is so small. Humans have become so small, weak, petty. And the problem, the spanner, is that this small man recurs eternally. So it's those two ideas coming together. It's the doctrine of eternal recurrence, plus the idea that people have become small. Their virtues have become small. They've denied their most powerful, their strongest virtues. They've denied half of them, their essence, essentially. And so it's those two things together. This small, weak, pathetic character will recur eternally. That's what is causing Zarathustra's distress. That's why he's in so much, that's why he's in despair. So the animals here realize that Zarathustra has no more passion, no more zest for life, and in fact, he wants to die, right? He wants to renounce existence, but they beg him not to go just yet. The next section is called On the Great Longing, and here Zarathustra, after listening to the animals, retreats within and converses with his soul, and he tells of all that he's given to his soul, and he wonders also who should be thankful for this, his soul because he gave so much to her, or should he be grateful because she received everything he had to offer. So again, he's still stuck in this this melancholic state, wondering, almost like imagine someone at the end of their life looking back on what they've done, what they've given, and kind of assessing. The next section is called The Other Dancing Song, and here Zarathustra converses with life. He's talked with life and wisdom once before, right? So he's back to another conversation with this young lady, and he expresses his hesitation regarding embracing her. because he thinks she's somewhat of a prankster. Sometimes he feels like he's hunting her, but sometimes he feels like she's hunting him. So he kind of, as he said in the last time he spoke with her, she's a fickle kind of mistress, right? He's never sure where he stands with her. Then at the end here, life answers him first. Responds by saying that Zarathustra doesn't love her as much as he claims, and she knows that he's planning on leaving her soon. So reference to him dying. And at the very end, Zarathustra whispers to her something. Presumably, he whispers that he knows the secret, the doctrine of eternal recurrence. And life seems surprised by this. She's surprised that anybody knows this. And they have kind of a quiet moment together, just reflecting. And then Zarathustra says in this moment that, quote, life was dearer to me than all my wisdom ever was. So there's, again, pitting this idea, life against wisdom, existence against knowledge. And we're back to, we're here at existence being the most important thing, this will to power that characterizes life itself. It's even more important than knowledge or wisdom. And this is kind of a turning point for Zarathustra. At the end here, there's a poem which affirms the doctrine of eternal recurrence. And it's in like 12 short lines. And this poem will be gets a fuller explanation at the end of the fourth part of the book. And the final section is called the Seven Seals. And here Zarathustra has finally accepted the doctrine of the eternal recurrence and pronounces how much he loves eternity and is full of passion for life. And that's the third part. And we'll move on to the last part in the next video. I guess a couple more videos. And once we finish that, I'm going to just give a summary, I think, and try and summarize some of the key points, because there is a lot of stuff here. And I'll try and just pull out some of the main ideas and give a kind of a nutshell summary. So thanks for listening. I hope you got something from it, and I'll see you next time.